Following program is sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts. Welcome to About Money, a different approach to investing you won't hear anywhere else. Your host, Mike Adams, is a registered investment advisor and works with investment portfolios exceeding over $100,000 in net worth and has a proven track record of managing long-term investments, surpassing the markets in the long term. The information shared in the following program is for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. And now, here's Mike.
It is About Money here on The Answer About Money, and it is Saturday. And I know that everyone is feeling really, really bad. They're not going to be able to watch any of those advertisements, those political advertisements. We saw one or two during the last few months, or one or two an hour, one or two every 15 minutes. Anyway, the election is over, and now the Democrats control the House of Representatives. The Senate has more Republican senators. And the White House is still the White House. So the implications of all that, we're going to talk about that. There are people in the country who believe that everything Obama did was wrong and everything Trump did is right. There are people that believe that everything Trump did is wrong and everything Obama did is right. I'm a numbers guy. It's more about what's going on, not significant about the president, the administration, Democrat or Republican. It's a focus of numbers. Yes, presidents and governments can impact business and consequently the stock market. But markets have a certain inertia. Businesses have a certain inertia. And I don't know any other way to describe it, but it's like an inertia. It's a spring-driven inertia. And the markets are doing that. The economy's been doing that. It's been doing that since 2009. And so I look just at the numbers, but I also want to look at what's going on. And now that we have a change, now the election is over, I want to take some time, look back at where we are, and look forward at what we expect. If you look at what was happening, in 2017 was a very, very good year for the stock market. The Standard & Poor's 500 was up 21.8% for that year. 21.8%. That was one of the best years we've had. Yes, Adams Financial Concepts was up 29.5, but we've had some years in which we trailed as well. If you look at 2018, I expected the market to be at least as good, if not better. I was wrong. It's not been that good. It is up 7% year to date. We're up 12% at AOC. And I don't believe that there's a reversion to the mean. Bull markets can last a very, very long time. If you look at the time period, 1982 to 2000, we went through a couple corrections. We went through some real downdrafts during those times. But during those 18 years, we had a secular bull market. And secular bull markets don't die from old age. They're born on pessimism, as John Templeton said. They grow on skepticism, they mature on optimism, and they die on euphemism. And we're somewhere between that skepticism and optimism portion. It seems like a lot of investors are worried. A lot of people think that the market is old in the tooth. And some of the people pulled out. Some of the people pulled out when Trump was elected. Some of the people pulled out last year. They've missed a significant portion of the market, and the best may yet be coming. It's not just this year and last year. I think that we've got a number of years to come. And I've been talking about that. I began talking about Dow 100,000 way back when the market was less than 10,000, way back in 2010. I think we're still on our way there, and we'll probably get there before we experience another significant downturn. So where are we now? That's the question. So at the beginning of the year, or at the end of last year, actually, we had a tax cut. And I had a question if it was really going to be a stimulus, but it was going to be a bonus for corporations and the wealthy. If you look back at the Kennedy tax cuts, if you look at the Reagan tax cuts, it was focused on the low end, the lower socioeconomic portion of the electorate. And what happened is that at that end, if you're making minimum wage, if you're making $7 or $10 or $15 or whatever the minimum wage is, and it was back at Kennedy time, remember, it was $1 an hour. Back at that time, $100, people questioned how much that would do, but it was a real stimulus for the economy because the people that were at the low end of the salary range, they didn't put the money away. They went out and spent it. They bought cars or washing machines or dryers or TVs back in those times. Same thing happened during Reagan times. But the current tax cut was not aimed at the lower levels. It was aimed at corporations and the wealthy. And even though some of us who got a tax cut because of the tax bill, we don't go out and buy more washing machines, didn't buy another car, didn't spend the money on clothes, didn't go more often to restaurants. Most of that money went into the stock market or into savings. And I believe that that's true of most of the wealthy who got a tax cut. And the corporations, by the way, the idea for corporations was that they would get this extra tax cut, they would spend the money, they would build new plant and equipment, and that would put more people to work and stimulate the economy, and the economy would grow and that the deficit would shrink. Well, the fact is, if Boeing got an extra amount of money through the tax cut, and they did, it doesn't mean that they're going to use that money to go out and build another factory, either in Seattle or in South Carolina. It depends upon the demand, and that was same all the way through the economy. The money didn't stimulate and go to capital improvements. It didn't go to capital spending. It went more to stock buybacks, a little bit to workers, and a lot just went to bottom line, went to profits and cash. Yeah, the economy was picking up. We ran 4% last quarter. We're running 3.5% this year. But if you recall, the secular bull market, 1982 to 2000, GDP during those times ran 2 to 3%, same as we saw from 2009 to the current time. So we're getting a bounce. We're getting a bounce to 4%, and now we're sliding back to 3.5%. So there's been some bounce, but it hasn't been a 5% growth. And even 4% doesn't look like it's going to hold. You know, the tax cut was the gamble that the GOP was guessing was going to push GDP to 5%. Didn't happen. And instead, we're looking at record deficits. Yeah. And that doesn't look like it's going to change very much. The economy is still growing. It's still doing well. But with the new tax schedule, it appears that we're going to continue to run the deficits. And they'll probably come down just because of growth. They were coming down from 2009 until 2017. They were coming down because the economy was growing, taxes were going up, and spending was not going up as fast. So we'll continue to see that. We're going to see continued record cash levels for companies. We're going to continue to see consumers lowering their debt. And with what's going on in the economy, we're seeing oil prices are staying down. Wages are beginning to rise. We got unemployment to 3.7%. Family incomes were up 5% in 2015, up 3% in 2016, and the average hourly wage is increasing by 3%. That has some impact for inflation. That has some impact on what's going on in the economy. Housing has not just recovered some, it's continuing to recover. And even though there have been some comments that interest rates going up, and we're going to talk more about interest rates in the second part of the program, interest rates have been increasing, but that's having an impact as well. If you look at the numbers, 2016 was a good year, 2017 was a good year, 2018 is looking like a good year. And the stock market hasn't been up to where I thought it would be at the beginning of the year. But if you look at the trailing PEs of the Standard & Poor's 500, normal is somewhere between 18 and 22. In 2014, it was 20. In 2015, 22. 2016, 24. 2017 got up to 25. And now we're below 22 again, which means what we're seeing is a normal profit growth is not being accompanied by a normal price growth. We should expect that we'll see that happen at some time in the future. Tax rates have reduced. Average corporate have added an extra 14% to corporations, and we're seeing that. We're seeing profits up 20% year over year. That will be reflected in stock prices going forward. It's not a question of chess, as Richard Bernstein has said. It's a question of checkers. The economy's in good shape, and we're moving forward that way. Yeah, there's still some issues that are hanging over the markets and that are hanging over the economy. And we're going to come to that after I introduce my guest. And I will be doing that very shortly after this commercial break. Don't go away. We've got a lot more to cover. And this is a critical time. You want to be in the right place at the right time. Don't go away. I'll be back right after commercial break.
More about money coming up with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So I've been talking about the election and the positive impacts and what's going on in the market. I talked about the tax cut because I think that underlies the markets in a big extent as we go forward. I think there's some clouds that overhang the market as well. We're going to get to that, about that later in the program, so don't go away. That's an important part of what we've got to say. But first, I want to introduce my guest, Danny Brawer and Norman Wu of Just Pokey. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Mike.
We'll start with Norman. Why don't we start with your background?
Sure. Born and raised in Seattle. Grew up here my entire life. Actually met Danny in the 4th grade, and we've been best friends since. Went to high school in Mercer Island, and then after that went to the University of Washington, where I studied finance and political science, and graduated there in 2011, and went on from there.
Okay. And Danny?
Norman kind of covered the beginning. Grew up in Seattle with him in the 4th grade on, Mercer Island High School, and then I decided to leave to go to California at UC Davis for college, also studying economics and political science, and then came back to Seattle and dove into the corporate world.
So you were in California and you were still in Seattle.
Yep, correct.
And you connected in Seattle to start a restaurant.
That's
eventually, yes.
Eventually, yeah. So what happened was after college, I was working up here, and so was Danny, and we were actually roommates. And we were both working in the recruiting staffing world. And during that time, Danny actually got promoted a couple times and got promoted down to California. And I was still working up here, and this was back in 2013. And then eventually I actually joined him down at his company in LA, and we started a corporate division of a big recruiting firm. And we did that for about a year and a half. And then while we were down there, we saw the meteoric rise of poke down in Southern California, and noticed that it was a very hot concept and one that was missing from Seattle. So we decided to move on from the corporate world, come back up here to Seattle, and give the restaurant biz a shot.
So first of all, I want you to define poke, because I know that a lot of people know what it is and a lot more are finding out every day. But tell us about poke. What is it?
Yeah, so poke is a Hawaiian food. It's been around for a very, very long time, but is only recently becoming popular in kind of the mainland. And so poke is actually the Hawaiian word for to section, slice, or cut. It's commonly in today's form basically like a deconstructed sushi bowl. So similar to a place like Chipotle, where you'll go and create a bowl starting with like a rice, protein, and some like veggies and stuff on top. Similar to that concept, but with us, obviously, you're doing mostly raw fish. We have some cooked options as well, and then a whole bunch of like fresh produce to put on top of that, and some really good, unique house sauces. And it creates like a really delicious, unique, healthy bowl at the end of the day. That's perfect for a light lunch on the go, or a healthy dinner as well.
And don't you start usually in a bowl with rice?
Yeah, rice is the most common sushi rice. We have brown rice as well. And then our other options are salad greens and zucchini noodles if you want something that is a little less on the carb side.
Okay. So you saw poke taking off in LA.
Yeah, it was really crazy to see. From the time I was there, from about 2013, 14, and 15, there were a few restaurants in the entire LA area, which was obviously massive at the beginning. And by the time I left a couple years later, there were literally several hundreds, kind of like Starbucks up in Seattle, across the street from each other, 5 and 2-block radius. It was really insane expansion.
And so you came to Seattle to start poke restaurants.
We returned back home to Seattle, yep, and got it going here. We were like the second or third in the area, and right now we have 7 locations, which is more than any other poke company in the Pacific Northwest.
So describe some of your restaurants for us.
Like the locations?
Locations?
Yeah, so our first store was in Kirkland, Washington. They're all about 1,000 to 1,500 square feet, and it's like quick service. So you order at the counter, and you kind of create the bowl along the way. You get to pick all the ingredients that go in it, kind of similar to like Chipotle or Subway. And our decor is very like clean and inviting, kind of what we'd imagine that would go along with kind of like a healthy, quick lunch. The stores are pretty bright and inviting, and we do free Wi-Fi, so it kind of has that like linger around and coffee shop mentality as well. And obviously it being, a fish-related item on the menu, there's a lot of decor items that kind of go along with that as well.
So is it a sit-down or is it takeout?
It's a sit-down restaurant in the sense that you have seating there, but you order at the counter. So there's not like table service waiters and waitresses. It's all order at the counter, and then you bring it and sit.
But you also have a lot of takeout, correct?
Yeah, we do. Yep. I'd say about half of our customers will take it to go. It's really convenient in that way that you can get the meal from start to finish in just a couple of minutes because everything is fresh and already prepared. And, with raw fish, it's not like we're cooking anything. But I'd say, it's about 50-50.
So, Norman, where are the restaurants located?
So our first store was in Kirkland, like Danny said, and then we soon after opened a store in downtown Bellevue. And then this year we've opened up stores in the Factoria Mall, downtown Issaquah, downtown Redmond in the town center, at the Renton Landing, in downtown Fremont, and then we've got 2 more stores on their way coming at the end of this year. One right by the University of Washington on the Ave, and then another one in downtown Bellingham.
Oh, in Bellingham, that's a long way away from here.
Yeah, it's going to be the first one that's outside of the greater Seattle area, and we're really excited, but I think the overall demographics in Bellingham are pretty similar to this area, and I think it's definitely going to be a big hit up there as well.
So is the food prepared in the kitchen at each location? Or?
Yeah, so the majority of the food's all prepared at each location. We have our sauces that are kind of made in our commissary kitchen just to make sure that there's consistency and that every store is the same in terms of what flavors are being put out there. But we have a good amount of the food prep in every store prepared in each kitchen.
Okay. So tell us more about the process of putting together the poke bowl.
Yeah, so I think what's awesome about poke in general, and obviously what we offer, is it's very customizable. We give customers a lot of different options, and you can pretty much build an infinite combination of bowls. And you start with your base, which is going to be the rice or salad, and then we use very high quality, locally sourced fish. We've got 8 different options with a couple of rotating specials, and from there you choose your fish, and you'll choose mix-ins, which will be a blend of vegetables and sauce. We'll toss those together, and then we'll throw it on top of your rice or salad, and then we'll also have a variety of toppings that you can put on top, and that can range from, crunchy toppings such as sesame seeds, or we've got crab salad, seaweed salad to accompany the bowl and kind of make it a full-on meal.
Okay. So there's one other thing. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about it. You do a bingo card.
Yeah, we just
Tell
started
us
a
about the
bingo
bingo
promotion. So it's a 5x5 bingo card, and each of the 25 squares has a different activity on it, such as visiting, our Redmond store or Renton store, or posting a picture on our Instagram account, meeting one of the team members. So each square has a different kind of action, and when you complete the action, you get a sticker in the store. And then just like a normal game of bingo, if you get 5 in a row, that's a prize. If you get like an X through the diagonals, that's a prize. If you get the border filled out, that's a prize. And then the first person to complete it, which has not happened yet, so everyone out there can still be a winner, gets a $100 gift card. And everyone else after that will get a $25 gift card.
So what happens if you get all the ones along the side?
Yep. So for 5 in a row, you get $5 off your next meal. And then for the next prize up, which is an X, you get a free bowl. And then for the border side, like you mentioned, that's a free merchandise item. So we have Just Pokey t-shirts, water bottles, Just Pokey aprons, and baseball hats as well. So you get to choose the prize of your choice.
I remember a long time ago, McDonald's had a thing where they had a Monopoly thing, but there was like one North Carolina out of millions of different things. And
Yes.
so it was extremely difficult to
This
win.
is much easier to win. Yeah, there's no probability working against you. It's kind of just a list of items to do, and once you do them, you'll get your prizes.
So the idea is to promote the restaurants.
Yep, absolutely, and to encourage people that may not know that we have other locations as well. So a lot of people will come into like our Factoria store, and they might work in the Bellevue area, but had no idea we had a Bellevue store as well. So that should kind of help with that, since they'll see come visit our Bellevue Square as a store option, and then they'll know of a store there.
So you have one other restaurant too. It's not just Pokey. You opened a new Chinese restaurant.
Yeah, we did. This is kind of a little bit different from Just Poke, but we saw the kind of popularity of the fast casual concept, and so we spun it off into a Chinese street food concept. For those listeners out there, if they're familiar with Din Tai Fung or Do Zone, it's very similar in terms of its offerings. We've got soup dumplings, wraps, Chinese rice bowls, except instead of having to go wait for an hour and spending north of $50, you can swing on by, grab a quick meal, the way Chinese street food was meant to be consumed and taken.
So where is it located?
It's actually located right next to the downtown Bellevue Just Poke in Soma Towers. It's in the bottom marketplace where there are a couple of restaurant concepts, and it's right next door to Just Poke.
Okay. So we're going to come to a commercial break pretty soon, and then I'm going to come back and ask you once again to tell us where the locations are, so people who are listening can go try Poke. I'll get that right once. It is one of those very special things, which, when you think about it, I am trying to think of the first time that I tried Poke. It's been at least 4 or 5 years ago before. So it is something fairly new.
Yeah, absolutely.
So anyway, for the listeners, stay with us. We're going to come back, tell you where those locations are, and we're going to talk about some of the clouds on the horizon for the stock market, given the new election. So don't go away. We'll be right back.
More about money coming up with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So I'm here with Just Poke. And so tell us again where the locations are.
So our first store was in downtown Kirkland. We opened about 2 years ago in that location, and then We opened locations in downtown Bellevue, Factoria Mall, Redmond Town Center, downtown Issaquah, the Renton Landing, downtown Fremont right by the water, and then we've got 2 more locations coming by the University of Washington and downtown Bellingham.
So tell us why somebody should try poke.
It's a relatively new concept, but I think a lot of people who like sushi are definitely going to like poke. It's very similar, and if you were to think about maybe combining concepts like Chipotle and sushi and making that into a sushi bowl, it's super healthy, it's fast. We meet a lot of the like gluten-free
dietary restrictions.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for. So it fits a lot of people's dietary restrictions, which I think is definitely great.
Okay.
It's hard to find something that's as quick and healthy as poke in a $10 price point. So it's definitely a unique concept right now.
So tell us why just poke and not poke at Met Market, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big advantages we have, especially up in Seattle, is that we're from this area, and we've, kind of taken the philosophy of being from Washington as a place to, not just do business in, but kind of a home to take care of. So unlike, Met Market and some of our competitors, all of our materials are all, biodegradable and compostable. We use really fresh and locally sourced product as opposed to something that, we might be able to get from a little bit cheaper overseas. A big thing for us is kind of partnering with local vendors. We actually basketball, sometimes teammates and sometimes opponents with one of our big suppliers, Charlie's Produce, a well big name in this area. So we really take to heart just doing business the right way. And we think that kind of demonstrates itself in the product, not only in the way we kind of treat our employees and customers, but also the way the meal kind of tastes at the end of the day, using really fresh and locally sourced ingredients that produces a really high quality product that tastes really well.
So, and I think for people who enjoy sushi, they know that there's different qualities. Different restaurants have different quality of sushi.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can find some really, really superb sushi and some that is just okay.
Yep. So sushi is, when you think of sushi and when you're talking about quality, kind of the common thing that comes to mind is tuna, which the highest grade you can have for tuna is AAA, which is what we use in all of our stores for all of our products. Once you get away from that, you can talk about AA and single A, which, to take kind of a similar analogy, think of baseball, how many people out there watching AA and single A baseball? It's just a different product. It's nowhere near as good as AAA, and it costs a lot more. But it really is a lot better of a product. So we proudly serve only AAA.
And given that, I mean, if you compare what you're furnishing for the price point compared to some of the top sushi restaurants in the area?
Yeah. I mean, our price point is a lot lower compared to what you might pay in some of the other areas. And luckily we have a really strong following and kind of make up for that in volume. So we might not be making, $20 a person, since we don't even charge that much to begin with. But when you have a good product and people come back a lot, it kind of pays for itself in the long run.
It's a place that you should really try. So do try. Again, tell us where the restaurants are so that people can know where to go.
We're mostly located on the east side. So Kirkland, Bellevue, Factoria, then Renton, Issaquah, Redmond, and our first and only location so far on the west side is in Fremont, pretty close to the Troll.
And it's mostly a lunch menu, right?
Yeah, our menu doesn't change from lunch to dinner. I'd say about 70% of our customers come before dinner time, so it's more lunch focused, but we definitely get a bit of dinner crowd as well.
Sounds great. So my listeners, please do try it. It's well worth it. So anyway, I want to shift gears and come back to the election and what's going on. One of the main themes of the election was health care. It was a big issue for Democrats. It was one that the Republicans picked up as well. The whole question about health care and the health care cost We've seen prior to Obamacare, we saw healthcare costs rising at 6 to 7% a year. I did a series in 2013 on surviving the Great Recession. Congress, both Democrats and Republicans, were arguing over taxes and regulations. But as I talked to companies on the radio, as I interviewed companies on the radio, it wasn't taxes and it wasn't regulations that were their biggest concern about cost. It was healthcare cost. Healthcare costs were increasing sometimes 8 and 10 and 12% per year. There were a significant number of people that were uninsured. And yes, there were problems when Obamacare was passed, but instead of fixing them, it's been a political football passed back and forth. The fact is, when you look at healthcare, older people, once people begin to get to be in their 50s or 60s, 70s or 80s, their consumption of healthcare increases as we get older, which means the premiums that are being paid in by older people are not covering the cost that they're taking out. So the idea of a healthcare plan is to have younger people who are very healthy, who are consuming very little of the healthcare system, that they pay into the healthcare system and they cover the cost that older people are not covering. I mean, it's the system. Think about it. Social Security works the same way. Young people are paying into Social Security. Older people are withdrawing from Social Security. So the idea of the individual mandate was to force young people to have health insurance. And it wasn't just about their health insurance. It was to have people, young people, supplementing what was going in from the older people. So when the individual mandate went away with the executive order from President Trump, it put things into a problem area with healthcare. Add to that the pre-existing conditions, which initially were talked about by the Democrats, and they were picked up by Republicans because it became a very big issue. Almost everybody knows somebody that has or that maybe themselves has a pre-existing condition. Both the Republicans and the Democrats talked about it. That's a condition which has to be dealt with, and it will be dealt with in the legislature. I mean, both the House and the Senate, the members of Congress are concerned about pre-existing conditions and being sure that people can be covered with pre-existing conditions. I fully expect that that's going to be part of what comes about. How that's done is going to be another issue. People with pre-existing conditions may be covered for all other things except for the pre-existing condition. That was one of the approaches, and that's one of the things that's come up. That almost seems to be defeating. So it's going to be interesting to see how this whole thing revolves. And it's not going to be an easy thing. It's not going to be one of those things that goes away either. It's going to create some real tension going forward. And that's going to have an impact on businesses and on what happens, because healthcare costs are going to continue to increase faster than GDP as long as we don't come up with a healthcare system that really works. Some of that, and some of the talk is extending Medicare to cover everyone. We're going to hear a lot about that. We're going to hear a lot about different scenarios for healthcare. But the whole thing is there is going to be additional costs for businesses. The question is the cost benefit, if the additional cost is going to justify what goes on. That's the first thing to think about. The second thing that's coming up is the impact of a trade war. We're going to talk about that. We're coming up to a commercial break again. I want to talk about the trade war. And the third thing I want to talk about is inflation, because both of those things are overhanging and will probably become more significant as we go forward in the next 2 years before the presidential election. Inflation I've been talking about for a number of years, expecting that this bull market will probably end with a high rate or a hyper rate of inflation rather than a great recession. I think that if you look at what's been going on and where the inflation rate is going, it's following the same pattern we saw in the 60s and into the 70s. I think that that's a greater danger. And what's going on in the economy with 3.7% unemployment, with wages ticking up, with commodity prices ticking up, those are the two big drivers of inflation. You can almost make a rule of thumb that 2/3 of inflation comes from wage increases, 1/3 from commodity prices. And right now we're seeing both of those increase. We're seeing a shortage of people to fill jobs, and we're seeing commercial, and we're seeing commodity prices increasing. That's putting a lot of inflationary pressure, and there's more to it than that. We're going to talk about that after this commercial break, so don't go away. We've got a little bit more to cover to finish out the day, and probably the most important part of what I have to say. So don't go away. We'll be right back after the commercial break.
More about money coming up with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
As we came to the end of the year, the talked about aluminum and steel tariffs were actually implemented. More tariffs were put on Chinese goods. And the question is, how is all working? There are people that believe we're winning the war. There's people that look at where we are and say that China imports $500 billion into the U.S. or runs a deficit of $500 billion. And that we actually ship more into China, but it's a lot less than they ship into the U.S. And therefore, if we put tariffs on their goods, it should be a positive impact. We should have a much greater leverage. You know, the question is that really, really right? The Economist pointed out a few months ago the 6th episode of The Apprentice, the Donald Trump apprentice. In the 6th episode, he fired the person who was the worst negotiator because they failed to fight back when they were belittled by a teammate. The episode was entitled Tit for Tat, and it seems to be how the president is using the trade war. It's a tit for tat. If we put on tariffs and if you don't respond as we wish, we're going to put on more tariffs. And it seems like the numbers are on our side. If you look at just the trade balances. But there's more to the story than that. There was a South Korean company called Lotte. South Korea allowed American anti-ballistic missile system to be put on, the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System. What that does is not only is it a defense system, but it alerts us if North Korea launches a missile. We're alerted within 7 seconds of the launch of that missile. Without that system, it's 15 minutes before we know if a missile is launched from our facilities in Alaska, which are the next closest. It really is geared toward the North Korean threats, but the Chinese don't like it either. China didn't like it, and they responded. So Lotte has supermarkets and department stores in China, and they first began to boycott the stores. And then they began to close the stores for fire inspections. And then they closed the stores for quality control. Then they closed the stores for another reason and another reason. And eventually Lotte withdrew all their stores from China. Now think of what we have. We have Apple and Walmart and General Motors and Chrysler and Ford and Boeing and Starbucks. And we have a lot of companies that do business in China. You know, we may slap tariffs on their goods, but think of what they can do to us. They can shut down the production of those facilities. They can make it very difficult for those companies to get their goods out of China. Those are parts for our automobile makers, for the Walmarts, for the Apples. They have some leverage. The difference between the government in China and the government in the U.S. is that the government in China owns all the banks. They decide who gets the money. They control the land, they control the military, they control the foreign policy. They decide what industries are important, and they control what companies come into China and which don't. That's a lot of leverage. We may look at it in terms of the balance of payments, and I hear on CNBC, which I watch all day long, I hear the prognosticators saying, we don't have to worry. We're winning the war with China. We look at the Chinese stock market, we're winning the war. If it really becomes tit for tat and they respond as they can, it can have a very dramatic effect on U.S. companies. So don't think that that's not in the bag. That can be something that really slows down the economy. So as you go through your investment portfolios, you have to be very, very aware of what companies can really be damaged through a trade war. Not everyone will. And so there's reason to look at your portfolios in relation to that. The second big issue is unrelated necessarily to whether it's Trump or whether it was Obama or anyone else. And that's, well, I say that, and yet the Federal Reserve Chairman, Bernanke, and his replacement were geared into and were economists. Jerome Powell, who is now the head of the Federal Reserve, is a lawyer by training. Bernanke did his research and expertise on the Great Depression. So when he had the Great Recession to deal with, he had all that expertise that he had generated in his papers done on the Great Depression. Powell is an expert on banking regulations. So what happens if we pick up inflation or another Great Recession? You know, if you look at what I've been saying in past programs or hear what I've heard in past programs, we've seen inflation during the 60s and 70s, a gradual increase in 60s into the 70s of inflation creeping up. If you go back to that time, William McChesney Martin served as the head of the Fed from 1951 to 1970. Appointed by Truman, he served under Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon. He was educated at Yale, both in English and Latin. His expertise wasn't in finance. He actually went to work for A.G. Edwards and bought a seat on the New York Stock Exchange in 1931. Regulation of the stock markets was his focus, and he did begin to tighten monetary policy in 1969. But that was just the beginning of a recession. Nixon, in his concern about getting reelected, instead of reappointing Martin as Eisenhower and Kennedy and Johnson had done, Nixon chose to appoint Arthur Burns, who was trained at Columbia, who taught at Rutgers from 1927 to 1944. His expertise was in business cycles, and he was influenced by politics. Like our president today, who comments about the chairman of the Fed, Nixon commented about Burns, and Burns began to take action to loosen monetary control in spite of having the fact of inflation picking up and having a recession going on. And of course, the rest of the story is that through the 70s, we had stagflation. Jerome Powell is not an economist. He's an attorney, a lawyer, an investment banker. Twice before we've had attorneys as Fed chairman, and neither time turned out to be well. I hope that Powell will be different, but I have a huge concern that we have a building time of inflation. The proper response to that is to raise interest rates. And what we're seeing is politically, the push is to not raise interest rates. And as the Fed met this week, they decided not to raise interest rates. I hope it was because of the economic situation and not because of what political motivation was involved. Those are the two things that are overlying and of concern. The three things, actually. Where we go with healthcare, what happens with a trade war, and where we go with inflation. Those are three big things that I believe we have to be concerned with in our portfolios, we have to prepare for. And the idea is to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. That's the whole focus of what we're doing. We're trying to be ahead of the curve instead of behind the curve, to be proactive rather than reactive, to look forward, not backward. That's what this whole idea is about, to introduce you to the concepts. And hopefully from this, you have a very good financial reward. Anyway, that wraps up today. Have a very good weekend and week coming up. And I will be back next Saturday. If it's next Saturday, it will be time for the answer about money. That's it for today. Have a good weekend.
You've been listening to About Money with Mike Adams, a registered investment advisor. If you'd like more information about what you heard today, or about Mike's investment philosophy and strategy, or if you'd like Mike to evaluate your own portfolio, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com. The information shared in the preceding program was for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. Join us again next Saturday at noon for more About Money with Mike Adams here on AM 1590. The Answer. The preceding program was sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts.